Welcome, everyone. You're here on our Ask CESO Communications webinar, and this is our 10th episode. I hope you'll go back and check some of the other. We had 9 others. We talked about website storytelling, crisis communication, branding, enrollment marketing, public engagement, graphic design, elections, and strategic communication planning. But today we're going to talk about writing for school communications. But first, we are the Center for Effective School Operations, or CESO, and we provide support services to school districts. We are on the communication team for CESO, but CESO also has other divisions, and we offer transportation, finance, HR, technology services, and we're even adding more services as well. So with us in the background is Justin. Justin, you want to come forward?
How's it going? Good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm good. Like we were talking about in pre-show, it's that time of year when all the events are happening at the campus. And, my daughter's going into middle school, which is frightening enough next year. So we're doing our wrap up to elementary this week. So I feel like I've been at her campus all week, but it's been really cool to see her with her friends and, kind of ready to take that next step and head into middle school, which again, frightening to think that kid's in middle school because it feels like she was just a baby. So a lot of fun.
It goes fast.
Well, today, I'm just going to tell you a little bit about the format of the show. If you're watching live, this is a Q&A. This is a live Q&A. I'll be in the background watching questions come in if we have them. I'll be sharing them with our panel today. We're going to start with questions that we've kind of collected from clients that we talk to every day. We also have a few that we've received from some other school PR friends around the country. If you have a question, a comment, anything, throw it into the comment section of your YouTube. That'll come straight to my laptop and I'll be able to see it and get it up in front of everybody. But yeah, it's going to be a good topic. I know writing is something that I've openly admitted multiple times that sometimes I don't feel like I'm the strongest at it, especially early in my career. So this is going to be one that I'm going to take notes on in the background. So I'm excited to listen to you and our guest, who I'll let you announce, talk about this topic today.
Justin, you're selling yourself short. I've seen your writing. It's good.
It used to not be good. You should ask Julie Thanem about the first thing I ever wrote for her, and she'll say, maybe I hired the wrong guy.
No, she did not. Well, thank you. Let's bring on Jim so we can introduce him. Jim Cummings is a senior strategist for CESO Communications. He is accredited in public relations, and he has more than 36 years of experience. He served twice as president of the Arizona School Public Relations Association. He served as the NSPRA Southwest Region vice president, and he served as NSPRA president in the 2014-2015 school year. He's won several ASPRA and NSPRA awards, including the NSPRA Front Runner Award and the Barry Gaskins Mentor Legacy Award. He has been a senior strategist with us in CESO since 2020. But pertinent to today's topic, prior to his work in school communications, he was a sports writer who covered high school and college sports, and he was the beat writer covering a Major League Baseball team for 3 years.
Hi.
So, welcome, Jim. Hi.
That makes me sound old, but okay.
Well, and I always have to make sure I introduce Justin. He's a communication strategist for CESO. He's a former educator. After 8 years of working with school communication departments in the Dallas-Fort Worth, Texas area, Justin joined CESO in July of last year. Was it last year?
2 years. We're coming up on 2 years.
Yeah, it was 2 years. Yeah.
Wow.
He's been recognized by NSPRA and TSPRA for his work in social media and video production. He won the 2020 TSPRA Bright Idea Award for his podcast, School PR Happy Hour. Check that out if you haven't. And recently, he won the TSPRA President's Award.
And I will, as always, introduce you, Nicole, so you don't have to introduce yourself.
you.
Nicole is a senior strategist for CESO Communications. Before joining CESO in the fall of 2022, she was responsible for communications in a district in Kansas City, Missouri for 23 years. She served as NSPRA president in the 2021-2022 school year, and she served as MOSPRA president 20 years ago. She's earned the NSPRA Gold Medallion, the NSPRA Front Runner Award, the NSPRA Learning and Liberty Legacy Leader Award, the MOSPRA Professional of the Year Award, and the MOSPRA Distinguished Service Award. And before she started in school PR, Nicole was a newspaper reporter covering the education beat. All right, friends.
I was indeed.
I am going to drop off and go to the background and keep an eye out on questions. Y'all have fun, and I'll see y'all later.
Thank you, Justin. Okay, Jim, jumping in here. good writing is not just innate, it can be learned. So, how does one get better at writing?
It's a great question. And it reminds me of the old story of the guy walking down the street in New York City with a violin. And he asks the New Yorker, how do you get to Carnegie Hall? And the answer was practice, practice, practice. And that's really how you get good at writing. You write a lot. But in addition to that, you have to read a lot because we all learn from good writing. We all have writers that we like. I have people who report on the news right now. Charlie Pierce, the political writer for Esquire magazine, Susan Glazer from the New Yorker, Jody Kanner from the New York Times, who anytime she writes a story, I'll just drop everything and start to read it. And I read those people because they know how to turn a phrase, and I learn from them, and I learn how to take what could be some really fairly boring material, mundane material, and really learn how to turn it in. And that's by reading a lot and then writing, almost sometimes not copying, but imitating some styles every once in a while. You just develop your own style. And one of the things I think people, really get caught up on is that they're expecting perfection in their first draft. And that's not really, that's over expectation. Good writers will go through several drafts. When I was covering baseball, every couple of innings, I would write a lead for my story. And then I'd go down, and a couple of innings later, because circumstances changes, I'd write another lead. And then by the time the ninth inning or the time the game ended, I would end up writing a lead that was probably a combination of two or three of the leads I had written earlier. And it's all about just being okay with your first draft and then going out to edit it. But probably the biggest thing, and I am so guilty of this, is that never, ever proof your own work. Because I actually went through, Nicole, a thing where I was when I was writing for the newspaper, where I was forgetting to put in the verbs in my sentences. And when I would read my copy, they were there, but the copy desk knew that they weren't. And they call me up and go, Jim, verbs. And then I'd have to go back in and fill in the verbs and do everything else. So you're always too close to see your own errors. So just make sure that when you're out there, have somebody proof your work. If you get a great editor, that's remarkably helpful.
Well, and lucky for me to have you on the team because you are a great editor. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. At CESO, we try to be strategic in our communications, and writing is technically a tactic. It's kind of a thing that you do to get to your strategy and goals. So how do we align our writing with our goals and strategies?
Well, most districts have a strategic plan in place. Some districts have, in addition to that, a marketing plan in place. And so you need to pay attention to the language you used when you develop those things. In the last school district that I worked in, we used a couple of hashtags on a regular basis. One was all in for all kids, and the other was a mosaic of minds. And that they were both attached to our marketing plan. The mosaic came from the fact that we used a mosaic design, not just in our logo, but in our backgrounds and everything else. And then the all in for all kids was just something we had developed years before, where it's just like, well, if we're going to go all in, we're going to go all in for our children. And so whenever I was writing something, whether it was for a newsletter, whether it was for social media, something for the website, when I was doing the superintendent's note, I would always manage to work both of those in at some point. I would, for instance, if a teacher did something really great, I'd sit there and say, Miss Kirby, did this and that for her kids. It showed that she was all in for all her kids by, and then and usually, on social media with a photograph. And then, we would use Mosaic of Minds when kids would win awards, and they did a lot, and it was always kind of fun. We would always include that, this is what we mean by Mosaic of Minds, because we had a child here win for science. We had another child over here who wrote a terrific essay that is now, moving up the ladder to a national prize. So you really just need to clarify your brand and then connect your writing to that. You've already done the writing. Chances are, if you're the school communications person, you've already done the writing for this strategic plan, or a lot of the writing for this strategic plan, as well as for the marketing plan. Now your job is to take your writing, repurpose it, and work it into your other writing as you're going along. It's also, and when you do that, and I know Nicole and I, we were having this conversation the other day, it's just like when you do that, it's really kind of a test run for your messages too. And so once the messages are out there, you can survey, you can use focus groups, and just find out, is this a message that's working for you? And then your audience will tell you. It will tell you what role it plays for them. They'll tell you how they prefer to be communicated, and they'll also get into some of the characteristics that they think are going to work for you. And so it's really easy to do. Like I say, that first step you've already taken by writing a lot for this strategic plan and for your marketing plan, and then it's just a matter of using it and testing it.
Agreed. Yeah, I like what you said about clarifying the brand. That's something that we often work with people on, where we do this whole brand clarification process. And
Yes.
some people think that they're just doing that to look at their visual brand, so like
Mhm.
logo and things, but a lot of it has to do with messaging as well.
Yeah.
Your brand is your entire experience, and so messaging really plays right into what we're talking about writing.
I agree. And in messaging, the visuals are great. It's very important because we do live in a visual world. But branding isn't about just the visual. It really is about who you are as a school district and what it means to be part of that school district. And the words matter because they're going to carry you. They're what becomes your not just your hashtags, but they become your mission, your purpose, your vision. And unless you continue to use those words, don't write a strategic plan and put it up on the shelf. Write it so that it's usable. And part of it being usable is using the language that you developed for it.
Exactly. Well, and I'll add a few things onto the whole writing strategically thing. You talked about how there was, you've got your district goals, you've got your strategic plan, and we want to make sure that what we're writing aligns with that and supports
Mhm.
that. So that's kind of the first piece. But then the message. If people get nothing else out of what you're writing, what do they need to know? And making sure you're crystallizing that and making it really easily accessible. I think I've got Made to Stick. Yeah, I've got it right here. This book
Great
I
book.
found really helpful.
Yeah.
Yes, because it talks about how to make a message sticky. And
Mhm.
one of the benefits of that is that it sticks in people's mind and is more effective at achieving your strategic goals. Things that make something sticky, according to this book, would be that it is simple. So you kind of get to the core of the
Mhm.
idea. It's unexpected. So it's like if you can surprise the audience a little bit, that will make it more sticky. That it's concrete. So that it's really understandable. And if it's understandable, they're more likely to remember it. That it's credible. So we all know in public relations, credibility can be about where is it coming from. That it's emotional. So using an emotional component that draws people in to the message. And then, as you like to talk about, Jim, that it tells stories. So it has an effective narrative
Yes.
because our brains are wired for story. And so we're more likely to listen to them, pay attention to them, remember them.
Yeah. I
And then
think I'm sorry. I
Go
just
ahead.
want to, but you mentioned the simplicity of it, and that was when I read Made to Stick. That's what really stuck with me. And you think about some of the companies that we talk about. We all know Nike is just do it, right? There's a commercial out now. I think it's for a credit card, but I don't remember what the credit card is. But I know this guy is selling masa, and he wants to bring masa to the masses. He kept something very, very simple. And you want to do that, and to me that is probably the biggest point that I took from the book.
Exactly. The other big thing I like to tell people when they're thinking about how to make their writing support their strategic outcomes is to not just think about what you're saying, but think about how you're delivering your message. So the medium is the message. So if I choose a press release for this, I'm making choices about who's going to see it and how they prefer to see it. If I put it in the print newsletter, that's one audience and it's going to be written in a certain way for them. If it's an email newsletter, that may be a different audience and it's going to be written in a different way. So depending on, for example, social media often has more of a colloquial sounding, a casual tone than you would put in your print newsletter. So, but also how it comes across, for example, in a crisis, in a school district, we send the messages out through text alerts and our official email system, but we're probably not going to send a crisis in our pretty newsletter format. In fact, we probably shouldn't, because that sends a message that this is just something that I can skim and it's not as important. It's something I can get to when I have time.
Yes.
So we really need to think about how the way we send it supports the message.
Agreed. And frankly, that should be, you talk about crisis messaging. That should be part of your crisis plan, how you're going to get that out. And that should just become something that you practice and repeat.
Exactly. My favorite author, one of my favorite authors is Brene Brown. Well, I have them all right here. In this one, she talks about clear is kind, unclear is unkind. And so one of the key things about writing in general, but especially writing for school communications, is that we need to be clear. So how do we write clearly? How do we ensure that we achieve that clarity? First, I'd say we need to be transparent with people. Sometimes when you're writing a message to go out, people kind of want to skirt around the issue a little bit.
Yes.
And if we're going to have a trusting relationship with our people, we really need to be straight with them and share as much as we are legally allowed, by policy allowed to say. And we try to err on the side of openness. In my career, I worked with a lot of education attorneys, and they've all been pretty great. I've been lucky at working with people who get that we need to balance the need to protect the district's liability against the fact that we are dealing with the court of public opinion, and we need to be really open with people in order to build that environment of trust that's really important for us all to be successful. And people in 2024 demand a certain level of openness and transparency that maybe wasn't always as true. And so they notice when we don't, when we're trying to kind of skirting around things.
Yeah. And I think that's almost something that COVID brought to us, because for so many, in the middle of the COVID crisis, we were communicating at just a rapid, we were all, whether we worked for a school district or worked with school districts, we were all in crisis mode for a couple of years. And we took the level of communications way up. And that's just not a genie you're going to be able to put back in the bottle. And I think
that's true.
We're seeing that now.
Agreed. One thing, this sounds like this is about grammar and mechanics, but active voice is also important to clarity, and it's important to how we basically take responsibility for what we're doing. So if I'm going to say a decision was made to increase teacher salaries, that is not as powerful, and it doesn't take responsibility as if I said the board voted to increase teacher salaries. So, and if you're wondering if something is passive voice, I like to give the zombie rule. So if you can finish the sentence with "by zombies," then it's passive voice. So a decision was made by zombies to increase teacher salaries. And so that works. So then it's passive voice. That sentence should be dead. It's a zombie. So we need to have that kind of level of responsibility for what we do. So not only does it sound passive, but it also doesn't take responsibility for what we're doing there. Context, we need to provide the whole picture. So sometimes we are just telling a piece of the puzzle, and we need to think about what else are people going to care about here.
Yes.
Like, what questions are they going to have, and try to answer all of those questions in
Mhm.
our writing.
Who cares is always a great question to ask yourself when you're putting
Yeah.
this stuff together.
And what do they care about?
Yeah.
Right. And often the media struggle with this. They want to do this kind of like false balance thing where it's this side and this side, but it's not all maybe true. And one of the nice things is if they just share a portion of the story, we have a platform where we can tell the whole story
Yes.
and with all of that context. And
And we
so
should.
that's helpful.
Yeah. I know
Agreed.
a lot of folks are kind of shy about doing that because they think that's gonna, harm their relationship with the media. That's not true. The media have their job, and we need to respect them.
Yep.
What they're doing. But we have our job too. And I've never run into any media person, in 30 plus years who got offended if we came out and clarified something. It's genuinely important. Sometimes it ends up that they will do a follow-up story to that to clarify their own story. So don't be shy about doing it.
Yep. Same. Accuracy, also important for clarity. So, people expect us to, spell the kids' names right, say exactly, have the right information about what the date was. Just for us, when I was still in my district, we actually tracked our errors so that we could come up with processes to avoid making those
Mhm.
errors again. And we found that it was more important to slow the process down. It was more important to be right than to be fast.
Yes.
So we could get a post up about some kids winning an award quickly, but we wouldn't be able to guarantee that the information that we got from the school had the kids' names spelled right or included all the kids that were involved that it should have been on the list. And so we had to slow it down and add in a process to make sure we had all of those things correct,
Mhm.
and double checked people. And it was more important to do that than to get it out fast. In a
Agreed.
perfect world, we could have it out immediately and be accurate, but balancing those two things, we had to come down on the side of accuracy.
Yeah, that's the Dan
Um,
Rather rule. Better to be accurate than fast.
yeah. Well, um, confidentiality, super important here. That's another thing we have to balance against that clarity piece and the quickness. So we have to be able to make sure that we're sharing as much as we can,
Mhm.
but uh, part of the thing that limits that is making sure that we are protecting people's privacy. So we're following FERPA, we're following the state open records laws, we're following board policy, and we're not jeopardizing
Yes.
liability. We don't jeopardize an open police investigation. So we're holding those things private, and they need to be kept private, but sharing as much as we can.
Agree. Yes.
So, well, speaking of media, Jim, you and I were both newspaper reporters. Will you talk a little bit about the lessons that you learned from journalism that you use today in writing for school PR?
Yeah. Actually, I used them right away. When I was first hired by the Phoenix Union High School District years ago, my job was to put out a 12-page tabloid on a monthly basis. And having written for a newspaper, that seemed really easy. It wasn't, as it turns out, I had to do a little bit of work, but everything that I brought with me to the district had to do with my work at the newspaper. And the first thing you learn, especially when you're working with great editors, is to have tight, concise writing. You use short sentences. You use simplified language. As you said the other day, Nicole, never use a quarter word when you can use one that's worth a nickel. Because what you're trying to do is deliver a message that's understandable to a wide variety of audiences. You need to use the inverted pyramid. A lot of us remember that from J school. The most important stuff goes up top, and you descend down into the things that are least important. That way, when you work with your editor, they can just cut from the bottom up, and it makes it easier for everybody. And frequently, we're our own editors to a degree, And so we have to realize, well, do we really need this? Do we really need this? And it gets back to what you were talking about previously. Who cares and what do they care about? And that a lot of times will determine where everything fits into your story. You need to really.
And also, people are skimming.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so having the stuff at the top, wherever they stop reading, they've gotten the most important stuff.
Yeah. And that's also the importance of a really good headline too, whether it's in a newsletter, whether it's the subject line in an email. I've always considered those headlines, the subject line in an email, because you got to get people interested. You got to get them to at least click to open the email, and a headline will drag you to the story. So yeah, that's really important. And then you have to have a strong lead. You really do. And that's the whole who, what, when, and where, right? That's the basics that need to go into your lead. If you can do something fancy with it, great. Usually when I start to write, I write a basic lead. I don't try to do anything exciting or because, and the reason I do that is because I want to get started. And so just a basic lead will take me where I need to go. Now I can go back on rewrite, and I can go back as I'm editing, self-editing, to change all that and make it a little more exciting and make it a little more brighter. But to get going, to get started, just the real basics, just stick to the who, what, when, and where, and you're good to go. And sometimes the why, right? Sometimes we have to get the why into the lead as well. The other thing I learned that was really important, and really it served me well, is meeting deadlines. Deadlines are important. Whether we're meeting a deadline for a client here at CESO, or if we have to meet a deadline to get a newsletter out when we were working with school districts. Deadlines are really critical. When with print materials, it's, frankly, the deadlines are a little easier because you can calendar backwards. When something has to be in the mail or in somebody's hands, and then from there you just go backwards. So that means you have to have it printed this week, and then you have this amount of time to create content and get everything ready. So meeting those deadlines is really critical. The other thing is we all had to answer to editors at the newspaper, generally on several levels. You had the copy desk people, and then the editors above them, and so on. Well, we don't really have that same type of structure in school districts, but in the end, your superintendent is your editor, and he or she, they're in charge. And so when they look at what you write, because everything I ever wrote was always cleared by the superintendent, with the exception of maybe some social media posts, which were pretty simple anyway. But everything, whether it was content for the website, content for the newsletter, content for for his or her message on the website, all of that goes through the superintendent, because nothing's worse than a superintendent who's surprised, right? What's the old saying? First graders like surprises, superintendents don't. And so they need to see all your stuff before it goes out. And on occasion, and sometimes frequently, they may not agree with the tone or tenor in what you wrote. They may not agree with some of the messaging. And so you can make your case with them, especially if you have a good relationship with your superintendent. And that's why those relationships really are important. You want to make sure that you're on firm ground, that you both have an understanding of where you're working from and where your mind's working. And so then you can make a case. If you disagree with the superintendent, you can make your case with them. And frequently there's room for compromise on both. But in the end, you're still going to have to go with what they tell you to do. Sometimes it's painful, but pick your battles. And that's really critical. I mean, if don't get into an argument over a single word, which is probably like the single most ridiculous thing you can ever do. It's just like, okay, what's a quote you showed me the other day, Nicole, is if you have to look up a word into thesaurus, Stephen King said this. If you have to look up a word into thesaurus, it's the wrong word. And so just prevent that from happening, prevent a lot of the group editing from happening. But in the end, do what your superintendent tells you to do. Because really they're responsible for the whole district, and frequently they know things, and more often than not, they know things that we don't, right? So there's a reason for what they're doing, or a reason for what they're asking for. And you have to honor that. You have to honor the fact that he or she is the boss, is responsible for the entire district and that they know things. And usually, and at least in my experience, within days or sometimes hours, you find out what it was that led them to that decision, and you're like, oh, okay, that makes sense. And so, again, pick your battles, but respect them, because they know what they know what you want to be. They know what's good for the district too. And the other thing about that I brought from these is curiosity. We have to be curious, not just about our own process. I think it's really important that we do self-examine too, as writers. What's our process? How can we grow? But it's important to be curious about your surroundings. That you now work for a school district. So what is it about a school district that you didn't know? And man, those first couple of years when you're working for a school district, you don't know anything. And everything, it's an absolute adventure. But there's a danger as you move along in the years and you become more experienced, and you can get arrogant about it. And you think you know what's going on, and you don't. And you really don't. You have to continue it. Your curiosity has to lead you. Education has changed. I started working for school districts in 1987. What happens in schools now is so completely different than what was happening in 1987 that it's not even the same process anymore. Kids are learning a lot of the same things, but how they learn, the things, the methods, the teaching methods that we employ, everything about education has changed in those years. Everything about education changed during COVID too, in a lot of ways. So your curiosity has to really lead you. And as a writer, that brings you to stories. What is it that you want to know, that you're seeing things now in the classroom that, you haven't seen before. You certainly didn't see it when you were in school. So use that curiosity, because if you're curious, the people who don't know what's going on, the families, moms and dads out there, they don't know either. And so you're acting on their behalf now. It's just like you're asking questions on their behalf, and let that curiosity lead you, because it really just leads you to the best stories. It really does. And I'm writing a story right now for a client on some of their technology, and I had to do some research on that. And that's, I guess, really the final point I want to make is I was going to interview these kids and these teachers and about esports. I have no idea about, you're talking to a guy who has other than the Pac-Man at the 7-Eleven, I've never played a video game in my entire life. And so I had to go do a lot of research on esports before I could even ask questions. And so prep for your interviews, let your curiosity lead you to the story, but then prep for the interview. So you're asking intelligent questions and you're learning the things that you want to learn too, because chances are, if you want to learn it, your readers are going to want to learn it too. So that's what I brought from the newspaper.
Yep. And yeah, I mean, the mindset that you learn working for a newspaper is helpful going into this. There are certain things that translate really well in terms of being able to write on deadline and understanding what people are looking for, and certain things that don't translate. And so you kind of have to make the shift mentally about what that I'm trying to build support for this district. And so I don't need to go find someone who's against us for this.
No, you don't. Well, you're telling different types of stories, and sometimes again, you're not looking for the balance that you necessarily would at a newspaper. But look, I was a sports writer. I wasn't looking for a whole lot of balance at all. I was reporting on baseball games, for crying out loud, or basketball games. They kind of dictated, where the story was going to go. So, but yeah.
Well, and speaking of that, you said you talked about your lead and all the inverted pyramid, but when you talk about different kinds of stories, there's actually different kinds of leads for different kinds of stories. So when you're writing that story about esports, you're going to have a different kind of lead for that than you would for a straight news story.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. And I've written a lead.
Uh-oh. Looks like you have frozen. I'm going to keep going.
I'll come in and help you out.
All right. Well, Jim is frozen, so I'm just going to go on to the next question. But the next thing we were going to talk about was how good writing for school communication looks different than good writing in a novel. Although there's similarities about creative writing and what we're trying to accomplish. And so I just wanted to talk about what the hallmarks are of good writing for school PR. And so one of the big things here is understanding that we're going to have to make some difficult choices. So when we are writing something we've got all the information about it, we might be tempted to just dump all that information on people. And that's not going to be effective. These are people who are busy, they're skimming, they just want you to get to the point and tell them what's the heart of the matter. So you have to cut the fluff, and sometimes that means that you're cutting out something that an element of the story or an element of the information that you think is important. And so you have to kind of prioritize your goals of what you're trying to accomplish over those elements that aren't serving your purpose. And maybe that means if it's all important that you have to break it up in multiple stories and deliver it over time. And so then you need to be planning ahead and say, in this newsletter, we're going to talk about this piece of the story. And in this one, we're going to talk about this. Our VP, Bob Noyad, talks about having layered communication. And this is an example of when you need to do that.
Yeah, I think that relates, as a video person. There's so many times I've gone out and shot a video and I'm like, oh, that's such a good shot. And I get back and I'm like, I'm working this shot in no matter what. And then you get to the end of it and the ultimate goal of the story has nothing to do with that beautiful shot you took. So it's almost like as you're writing these stories and you get really as you're writing and you get really into what you're writing and you really feel the story you're writing, don't get too close to it because you may end up a diatribe, a really long story that needs to be taken down and some of your favorite pieces may be cut. And like you said, you may have to approach it a little differently and say, this is now a series. There's a separate story, a tangent that comes off of this. So I think there are a lot of things when it comes to writing that I find myself in my writing getting super connected to the words. And then when I have to step away from my computer when my proofreader gets in there, my person who's editing, because I get all in there. What are they changing? What do they want to change? And I think that's it's important to remember that, like Jim said very early in this, having other eyes on it's good because the other person's not so married to it and not so involved in it. And one thing that for the folks that are listening that may not spend their entire time writing, like I spend a lot of time writing, but I spend a lot of time creating. Writing for video and writing for social media, like you've already said, is a lot different than writing feature stories. So coming in and checking the style that having your person, kind of paying attention to what kind of style you're working in. I know there's been times where I've written things and sent them over to you and said, hey, and you're like, hey, you're writing this like a video. We need to kind of shift this around. So having your trusted folks and then making sure you kind of keep clean in your head what you are writing for and kind of staying true there. That's important.
Agreed. Totally agreed. One thing we kind of alluded to before here is that we have to think about what the audience cares about. And this is so crucial to how you kind of design what you're writing. What do people in your district care about? What do people in your community need to know? What do parents here care about? So in their mind, you get if they're reading your stuff and they're asking, so what? Your writing needs to answer that question for them in a way that acknowledges that you have thought about who they are and what they need.
I agree. And then there's also, when it comes to, so what do they need to know? There are many different styles of writing out there now to work with. I'm currently reading a book that's a little bit different than the normal school PR writing that you would have. It's back here somewhere. Smart Brevity. It's the guys who do Axios, and their format is, here's what's important, here's why it's important, and if you choose to go deeper, here's 3 things deeper about it. And they're in and out. Like, that's their whole thing. And as we talked about on the last episode 9, about being strategic, if you know your audience, you know your public, you know who you're writing for, you may realize that this is how they need to be communicated with. They're skimming. Like you've said multiple times, they're skimming. So if they're skimming, let's put the most important thing in the first 3 sentences.
Yes. And
if it fires up something inside of them, they want to keep going, they've got more to dive into from there. I I do know we did get a question from Jody Fielder from the internal communication, the internal communications officer for Madison Metropolitan School District. She wanted to ask a question. Should the messages go to staff and should the messages that go to staff and family be different? So what are your thoughts on that? Like when you're sending something to internally and externally, how do they differ, if they differ at all?
Yes, so that it really touches on the same point about audience and targeting their needs. So it kind of depends on the message. So generally, they're going to need to have the same information, but whether you tweak it a little bit for the audience depends on whether this audience needs something different. So, for example, is it a crisis message in which staff need to know that they need to do something or say something? Then we need to tweak that message for them. Sometimes the difference is only in timing. They need to get the same message, but the staff need to get it first and say, this is about to go out to all families so that they know what their families are about to see. As we, Jim just texted and said his internet went out. So sorry, folks. I'm glad we got to have him for a while. But yeah, we want them to know how to respond. And if families get the message, the staff are going to get questions. And so they need to feel prepared for that. So that's the kind of difference that I would see between a staff message and a family message. But generally, we want to make sure that particularly your staff are not getting a different message where they don't have all the information that the families are getting.
Well, a follow-up question there that I just have, because as we advise clients and work with folks, that is something we always say is, hey, your staff needs to know first. Your staff needs, if there's a big announcement coming up or something that's going to cause people to ask questions, your staff needs to be, your internal folks need to be the first to know. Sometimes people say, so what is that? 5 minutes, 10 minutes? What is your call on that? When you say, hey, I want to let the staff know of this big event or this big announcement, how much time is between email 1 and email 2? How much time are you giving them to digest it? And obviously, like you said, the message may be a little different because in the message internal, you may work in some talking points for, if you get questions, here's some answers for you. But how much is that time different? Like, is it 5 minutes? Is it an hour? Is it 24 hours? What's your thoughts?
So, okay, again, it's going to be an it depends message, but here's what it depends on. It depends on how likely are people to go out and start talking about this. So it's important for people to hear about it from us and not through the grapevine.
Right.
So if this is the kind of thing that the instant a staff member finds out about it, they are going to start talking about it, and they are going to maybe start sharing it through their own lens and their own filter. We need to make sure that length of time between the time that they got the message and that we send it out is very short.
Right.
If it's something that, hey, it's not going to be that controversial, it's not going to be that hot of a topic, I want the staff to have a little time to digest it and to be able to spend some time understanding it and asking questions first, then I'm going to have a longer period of time. There have been times, and this is always a last case scenario because I always want the staff to get it first, but there have been times when this was a huge crisis that was going to be an instant piece of conversation, and it was really important that nobody heard it through the grapevine, where I will have to send it out all at once just because of the time. Again, that's last case scenario, but preferably there's a little bit of time there. So generally it's somewhere between 15 minutes and 5 minutes because the speed of communication in 2024 is so fast. But sometimes it gets even shorter or longer if it's not that big of a deal.
Well, it looks like we've got Jim back with some internet, so we're going to bring him in. Jim, we're on.
Hey, he's back.
Yeah, leave it to the end. Yeah, here I was in the middle. I have no idea where I cut out, but my internet went down, and I have no idea why.
Well, hey, you know what? That's what we do in school PR. We just pivoted and kept going. We just kept it running. So,
of course, you did.
we were talking a little bit about should the message for staff and families be different? Nicole talked about, informing your staff first. I asked a follow-up question of how long do you give them? Do you give them 5 minutes? Do you give them 24 hours? And Nicole said it's depending upon your situation and how controversial, or if people are going to start talking or sharing it. So
it's a great question.
I mean, you didn't hear exactly what we said early, but what are your thoughts on that, on staff and families messaging, and what should those messages that you send to them, should they be different, and how should they be different?
I'll risk repeat. I think number one, I think there should be some commonality in the messages. I think the basic information should be the same. And when I was in the school district, I actually had an order in which I did this. Working with the superintendent, we always made sure the school board got the message first. But within, really almost simultaneously, we were sending it out to staff. And then, frankly, within just a couple of minutes, we would send it out to families, because I think, as Nicole was saying, communication these days is so fast. There's stuff, if something happens on a campus, we have, students out there carrying their cell phones, and they're texting mom and dad, letting them know, or, their friends. And oftentimes these days, parents know even before the staff knows, and parents know before the superintendents know. So the timing of this, it's almost like you got to do it all at once to get there. But I always like to make sure, of course, the board, it's obvious why they need to be informed first, because, they're the elected representatives. But I always think staff has to always be first on my list, because they're the ones dealing with the crisis. They're the ones who are gonna get the calls from parents and everybody else, and so they need to be informed as best as possible. And if you have just a couple of minutes in between getting the message out to staff and then getting it out to families, then you're serving yourself well.
Yep.
Awesome.
Well, we did have one question we were going to ask that we kind of skipped past because you had gone off the air. But let's talk a little bit about the piece. Part of good writing is just the mechanics, the rules, like grammar, style, that kind of stuff. So what are some important rules to remember in school communication?
So couple of things, and we talked about some of these earlier. The first is the active voice. And as you said, you do the zombie thing. I do the ing thing. If a word ends in ing, it's got to go, because that's not the active voice. Passive voice doesn't get you anywhere. Using the active voice brings people into whatever it is you wrote. Even something that is a one-liner, a one-line social media post has to be done in an active voice to get any kind of engagement, to bring people in. And in longer stories, it's absolutely critical that you use the active voice. Like I say, avoid the zombie words, right? Avoid the zombie sentences, and avoid the ing words, if at all possible. And in education, we have a tendency to use a lot of jargon, and especially if you're an experienced PR person, you really have to work to make sure that you're translating educationese into English, because after you're around school folks for a while, you begin to understand these acronyms. You know all the ABCs of this stuff, but you forget. It's easy to forget that others don't. So you just have to make sure every time you sit down, if there's an acronym in there, you better explain it, because otherwise people aren't going to understand your writing.
Well, a lot of the people that we work with have doctorates where they were incentivized and trained to write using jargon and educationese, and to be a little more the opposite of what we just said about being concise.
Yes.
That they need to add in more to it, and that's what they were told was good writing for that. And so we kind of have to train them that writing for the public is different.
Yeah, and that's a conversation worth having too, because again, I guess this gets in the style, because they're writing for academics. We're writing for clarity and to send a message. And in this day and age, we don't have a lot of time to go ring around the rosy, as you'll frequently find in academic writing. And that goes to picking your style too, and your style book. Frequently, they're using the AP style or the Chicago style, but it's not the AP it's not the Associated Press that they use. They use, I think it's the American Psychological Association. I think it's their style book. But or something like that. I could be wrong. But for us as communicators, I always recommend use the Associated Press style book. It serves you well, not just at the newspaper, but it serves you well because they go through great lengths over at the AP. I used to be friends with an AP writer back in Philadelphia who is involved in their style book revisions every year, and just a really, really smart guy. But boy, they go through a lot to do that. And so they do a lot of studies. And so what they recommend in there is really just good, solid communications work, because it simplifies things. It's all about clarity and all about getting where you need. So, you have to pick a book. And frankly, if I'm a school communicator, and even now I'm picking the Associated Press style book. And a lot of times within your own district, you make style adjustments too. I know that in every district I was in, I honored anybody who earned a doctorate in my writing. And so generally, if I was working for a newspaper, I wouldn't refer to Dr. Deering in a newspaper. It would just be, Justin Deering on first reference, Deering on second. But when I worked for went to work for a school district, it became, Justin had earned his doctorate, so now he is Dr. Deering. And so that's how we would refer to him on second reference. Also, little things like, do you capitalize district when referring to your own district in these pieces, or do you still use the lowercase? I always went with the uppercase because it distinguished the district I was working for from maybe another district I was talking about. And so you have to make those little twists going through there. And then, you're going to have, and this is a fight that everybody's had. Are you going to go with the Oxford comma or not?
Exactly.
Or do you get, I was in, and I know you know this, Nicole, I'm an anti-comma guy. I try to avoid commas as much as possible.
We have comma debates.
Yes. And we, at the newspaper I worked at, we used to call people, you used a lot of commas, comatose, but they had their reasons too. But find neutral ground when you're editing your pieces, but watch out about them, and watch out for commas, because a misplaced comma can kill you. It really can. And not using a comma or not using the Oxford comma when it's really required is just bad for clarity. Now, if it's just a list of things, you don't have to use the Oxford comma, right?
If you're following that style that you
if you're kind of getting that way. But I've actually used both within the same piece. If I'm doing like a list of things, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, I would use the commas, between the numbers. But not after the end. But if I had a clause that really needed to be distinguished within that sentence, you need to employ that Oxford comma. And so the debates about whether it's good or bad, it's situational, like just about everything else in writing.
Absolutely, exactly. And then there's also the common errors that people have to look out for. The obvious ones that, use the right version of there.
Yeah. Affect and effect. Know the difference.
Exactly. Just watch out for those.
Yeah. And then, and I'm going to repeat something I said earlier, because it bears repeating. Never, ever edit your own stuff. If you can get 2 sets of eyes, 3 sets of eyes on it, that's terrific, but never edit your own stuff. You're simply not, you think things are there that aren't, and you're not going to see the errors.
Exactly. So. Well, thank you so much, Jim. I appreciate you
Sorry I cut out
being on this episode. Nope, we got you back in, and we're just cool PR people do. We pivoted. Let's see. So thanks everybody for listening in. I hope you'll join us for our next live episode. We're looking at a June 7th date, but more information coming soon. We're going to be talking about communicating complicated financial issues. And so if you'd like to ask us a question for that, please email me at nicole.kirby@CESO.com. We're going to have our Vice President, Bob Noyd, on that one, as well as Senior Strategist Julie Thanum. And we're going to have joining us from our parent CESO company, our co-CEO, Ron Meyer, who's got a background in school finance. So we're excited to have him join our conversation. If you'd like to learn more about CESO and all of the services that we offer to school districts, including communications, go to theceso.com. And if you'd like to talk to us about communication support in your district, contact Bob Noyet, our vice president. His information's on the screen, or any of us on the team. So thanks so much. We'll see you next time.